Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah, and today, I want to take you on a journey into a story that has defined my life. It's not just my story, it's a tale woven with love, betrayal, and the haunting echoes of fear that shaped me in ways I could never have anticipated. You may think this sounds like a gothic novel brought to life, but every word I am about to tell you is real, a shadow that lingers with me even now. Let me take you back to the very beginning, to the quiet town of Tyrone, Ireland, where this story was born. I grew up in a prominent and affluent family in Tyrone, a serene yet beautiful part of Ireland. My parents had lofty aspirations, but they were never directed at me. Their hopes were reserved for sons who could carry forward the family legacy. As the younger of two daughters, I often felt like a shadow in my own home. My sister, 6 years my senior, was the one person who brought warmth into my otherwise lonely childhood. She was my protector, my confidant, and my guiding light. But everything changed when she got married and moved to Dublin. I was only 12 at the time, and though her wedding was a joyous occasion filled with music and laughter, I couldn't shake the deep sorrow of losing her presence in my life. Her departure left an immense void in my life, one that felt almost impossible to fill. Without her warmth and companionship, I found myself adrift in a house that felt increasingly cold and empty. My sister had always been my sanctuary, the one person who made me feel seen and valued. With her gone, the loneliness became unbearable, wrapping around me like an unrelenting shadow. My parents, consumed by their ambitions and social obligations, seemed to retreat even further into their indifference. Every day, the house seemed quieter, the walls closing in, leaving me to grapple with a profound sense of abandonment. A year later, tragedy struck like a cruel twist of fate. A letter arrived from her husband, Mr. Carew, informing us that my sister had fallen gravely ill. She expressed a wish to return home, to be surrounded by family during her time of need. My heart was torn. I was devastated by the thought of her suffering, yet secretly overjoyed at the possibility of seeing her again. For weeks, I held on to hope, imagining her walking through the door, her presence lighting up the house once more. But fate is not so kind. What awaited us instead was a harrowing turn of events that shattered my hopes and left me grappling with an even deeper sense of loss. I waited with bated breath on the day my sister was meant to return, my ears tuned to every creak and rustle, hoping to catch the sound of her arrival. The hours dragged on, and with each passing moment, the anticipation grew heavier. Late into the night, the air grew unnaturally still, broken only by an eerie, haunting cry that echoed faintly through the darkness. My father and I rushed to the doorstep, straining our eyes into the empty void of the night, but there was nothing, no carriage wheels, no familiar figures stepping out of the shadows. Confusion and dread settled over us like a heavy fog. The next morning, a messenger arrived with the news that crushed what little hope I had held on to. My sister had passed away in the early hours of the morning, just as we had stood waiting for her. The haunting cry? To this day, I wonder if it was her spirit's final farewell, a sound carried by the wind to reach us one last time. The grief that followed was indescribable, a weight that pressed down on my heart, leaving it fractured and raw. For 2 years after her death, I lived in a haze of sorrow. My once vibrant world had dulled, and I barely spoke to anyone. Mr. Carew, my sister's husband, remarried quickly, a decision that left me angry and resentful. How could he forget her so easily? Meanwhile, my parents turned their attention to me, now their sole heir. Suitors began visiting, eager to align themselves with my family's wealth, but I dismissed them all. I wasn't ready to marry, not after everything I'd endured. At 16, my mother decided it was time for me to leave Tyrone and venture to Dublin, where the prospects were richer and more sophisticated, as she put it. For the first time in years, I began to feel a spark of joy. Dublin was alive with music, dancing, and friendly faces. I allowed myself to laugh again, to feel young and carefree. But my mother had an agenda. One night, she came to me with a proposition, a marriage to Lord Glenfallen, a man from a wealthy and prestigious family. Lord Glenfallen was much older than me, with a reputation for being stern and distant. I hesitated, but my mother insisted, describing him as a good man who could offer me security and a life of comfort. And so, I agreed. Perhaps it wasn't love, but it felt like the right decision for my future. We married the following spring, and with a mix of hope and apprehension, I left Tyrone to begin a new chapter of my life at Lord Glenfallen's estate Carrilla. It was a sprawling mansion, surrounded by lush gardens, ancient trees, and a forest that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. At first glance, Carrilla appeared enchanting, like a dream carved from the pages of a fairy tale. The gardens brimmed with life, bursting with flowers of every color, and the air was filled with the songs of birds. Yet, despite its breathtaking beauty, there was something unsettling beneath the surface. The mansion's towering structure seemed to loom over me, casting long shadows that crept into my thoughts. Carrilla held an aura of secrecy, as though the walls whispered stories I was not meant to hear. Little did I know, those secrets would soon unravel my sense of reality, drawing me into a world of mystery and fear. On my first day at Carrilla, I met Martha, the housekeeper, who showed me around. She was kind but seemed guarded, especially when she introduced me to my room. As she opened the door, I froze. There, in the corner, was a large black coat hanging ominously. It sent a chill down my spine. Martha's face paled, and she muttered something about the black coat being a sign of misfortune in the Glenfallen family. I dismissed it as superstition, but deep down, I felt uneasy. In the days that followed, an unsettling transformation overcame my husband. The cheerful and engaging man I had met in Dublin seemed to vanish, replaced by someone distant, quiet, and burdened by unspoken worries. His demeanor became heavier, his laughter disappearing entirely. One evening, as the firelight flickered in the dim drawing room, he turned to me with an unusually stern expression. "There is something you must remember," he said, his voice low and grave. "You are never to enter the back rooms of this house or the small garden behind it." The seriousness in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. Although I nodded and promised to abide by his request, the cryptic warning lingered in my mind. Why were these parts of the estate forbidden? Was it merely a protective gesture, or was there something hidden, something he didn't want me to discover? The mansion, with its endless corridors and dark corners, seemed to pulse with an unspoken tension. Despite my attempts to shake off these thoughts, curiosity began to gnaw at me, growing stronger with each passing day. One fateful afternoon, I returned to my room, expecting the usual quiet sanctuary, but instead, I was met with a sight that froze me in place. By the fire sat a woman, her presence chilling and otherworldly. She was blind, her eyes an eerie, ghostly white that seemed to pierce through me despite their emptiness. Draped over her shoulders was a black coat, not just any coat but one that seemed to radiate an unsettling aura, as though it carried centuries of sorrow. Her voice was sharp and commanding as she introduced herself as the real Lady Glenfallen. Her words struck me like a thunderclap. The real Lady Glenfallen? How could that be possible? I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, my reality unraveling. She demanded to see my husband, her tone imperious, almost as if she still held dominion over the house. Shaken and deeply disturbed, I sought out my husband to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But when I confronted him, his reaction only compounded my unease. His face turned pale, his expression veiled with an uncharacteristic mix of fear and frustration. He refused to explain, brushing aside my questions with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Forget what you saw," he said, his voice taut with tension. "But how could I?" His silence and avoidance only deepened the growing pit of fear within me, leaving me to wrestle with unanswered questions and the creeping suspicion that Carilla held secrets far darker than I could have imagined. Martha eventually sat me down, her face pale and eyes filled with a mix of pity and fear, and told me the truth that had haunted the walls of Carilla for years. The blind woman, she explained, was not of the living. She was the ghost of Lord Glenfallen's first wife, a woman whose life had ended under a shroud of mystery and suspicion. Whispers among the household staff suggested that Lord Glenfallen himself may have been involved in her untimely death, though no proof ever surfaced. Some said she had discovered secrets too dark to bear, while others believed jealousy had consumed her final days. Whatever the truth, her spirit had never left Carilla, tethered to the mansion by unresolved anguish and a thirst for vengeance. Martha's voice trembled as she recounted the stories, and I could see the weight of years spent living under this shadow etched into her face. It was then that I understood. Carilla was not just haunted by a ghost, it was a prison for the echoes of guilt and tragedy, waiting to ensnare anyone who dared to uncover its secrets. One night, as I lay in my bed, a piercing chill woke me from my restless sleep. Standing at the foot of my bed was the blind woman, her ghostly figure illuminated by the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. In her hand, she held a gleaming knife, its sharp edge reflecting the dim light like a sinister promise. Her voice was cold and unwavering as she spoke, "Leave this house, or you will not see another dawn." Terror gripped me with an intensity one had never known. I tried to move, to scream, but my body felt as if it were encased in ice, paralyzed by an overwhelming fear. Her pale, sightless eyes seemed to penetrate my very soul, as though she could see each thought and every hidden fear I had ever harbored. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air growing oppressively heavy and suffocating, as if the mansion itself conspired against me. My voice, trembling and barely audible, broke the silence as I managed to whisper, "Why? Why are you doing this?" She stepped closer, her suffocating presence filling the room like an oppressive fog, and hissed with a venomous intensity, "This house does not belong to you. It never will. You are an intruder, unworthy of its legacy. and I will see to it that you never leave alive unless you heed my warning and depart at once." The moment she vanished, an icy dread consumed me, propelling me toward my husband in search of answers. My voice trembled as I recounted every harrowing detail, desperate for reassurance or even a flicker of understanding. Yet, instead of comforting me, he brushed my fears aside with an exasperated wave of his hand. His face, pale and shadowed with an unreadable emotion, betrayed more than he said. "You're imagining things," he muttered coldly, the warmth and care I once recognized in his tone utterly absent. "Go back to bed and forget this nonsense." His dismissal felt like a slap, sharp and isolating. It wasn't just the words that stung, it was the void in his expression, the way his eyes seemed burdened by secrets too heavy to reveal. Each syllable echoed in my mind, not merely deepening my fear but also solidifying my realization that his silence wasn't born of ignorance. It was an act of complicity. He shielded truths that he dared not confront, truths that cast long, ominous shadows over both him and the mansion. The weight of these unsaid things pressed on me, leaving me utterly alone with my terror. As I returned to my room, the house itself seemed to thrum with unspoken warnings, its looming presence growing heavier, as if Kurilla itself mourned its dark legacy alongside me. His words only deepened my fear, each syllable a sharp reminder that he held answers he was unwilling to share. It was evident that he knew far more than he let on, and his silence on the matter left me feeling isolated, trapped in a house brimming with secrets. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts raced, each one more harrowing than the last. The weight of the mansion's oppressive history pressed down on me, its shadows seeming to stretch and twist with malicious intent. It was then that I realized I could not stay in Kurilla any longer. With trembling hands, I began to pack my belongings, every small noise magnified in the deafening silence of the night. The creak of the floorboards beneath my feet felt like warnings from the house itself, as though it resisted my departure. Each step toward the door was filled with apprehension, but also a growing sense of resolve. By dawn, I had left the cursed estate behind, its haunted corridors and oppressive memories forever etched into my mind. The air outside felt lighter, freer, as though I had escaped from a suffocating grip. Yet, even as the distance between me and Kurilla grew, I knew its shadows would follow me, lingering in the corners of my thoughts. Back in Tyrone, I found a semblance of peace, though it was not without its challenges. The familiar landscapes of my childhood, once overlooked, now held a new significance, offering a quiet sense of stability amidst the emotional turmoil I carried. My parents, who had once been distant and emotionally detached, seemed to have undergone a quiet but profound transformation in my absence. Their once rigid demeanor softened noticeably, and they welcomed me back into their lives with an openness I had not experienced before. Perhaps my departure had stirred a realization within them that life's fleeting nature demanded more love, less rigidity, and a deeper appreciation for the bonds of family. For the first time, I felt the warmth of their arms around me, an embrace that carried unspoken apologies and an acknowledgement of the years lost to emotional distance. Their gestures spoke louder than words, bridging the gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. This newfound closeness brought a bittersweet comfort, one that illuminated both the pain of the past and the hope of a different future. I clung to these moments, cherishing them as anchors in the sea of my turbulent emotions. Tyrone became my sanctuary, a place where I could exhale the burdens of Kurilla and rediscover the simplicity I had long craved. Here, I could rebuild myself piece by piece, far from the suffocating shadows of Kurilla's haunted corridors, where every step had felt like treading on secrets waiting to be unearthed. Rebuilding my life was not just a journey of time but one of profound introspection. The routines of home became my lifeline, each crackle of the fireplace a soothing reminder of safety, the steady toll of the local church bell grounding me in the present, and Tyrone's tranquil landscapes a balm to my soul. Every sunrise seemed to carry a promise of healing, yet the wounds Kurilla left behind were not easily mended. The shadows of my past often crept into my thoughts, uninvited and persistent. A sudden chill in the air, the way the evening light played on the walls, or the faint rustle of leaves in the wind each brought back vivid memories of Kurilla's oppressive darkness. These fleeting sensations served as reminders that, though I had physically escaped, its haunting echoes lingered in my mind, waiting for moments of weakness to resurface. But in these reflections, I also began to find strength, a resilience forged in the struggle to reclaim my life from Kurilla's grip. But with each passing day, I leaned more deliberately into the light, making a conscious effort to embrace the present and rebuild my life with care. I started with the small joys, taking long walks through the verdant countryside, letting the cool breeze and gentle rustle of leaves remind me of simpler, kinder days. I devoted time to tending the garden my mother had neglected for years, finding solace in the earthy smell of soil and the bright colors of blooming flowers. It was as if every seed I planted was a symbol of renewal, each sprout a testament to growth despite adversity. Rediscovering the value of human connection became another cornerstone of my recovery, sharing tea and laughter with old neighbors, reconnecting with friends who had slipped away during my isolation, and strengthening the bonds with my family. These small acts of renewal, though seemingly ordinary, became the foundation of my healing, each one a quiet yet powerful defiance against the weight of Kurilla's lingering hold on me. Yet, even in the quiet comfort of my childhood home, Kurilla's shadows clung to me like an unshakable ghost. Some nights, I would jolt awake, my heart pounding as if I could still feel the icy presence of the blind woman looming at the foot of my bed. Her pale, sightless eyes haunted my memory, a reminder of the threats that once filled my life with dread. On other nights, my dreams pulled me back into the twisting, shadowy corridors of Kurilla, where the walls seemed to whisper forgotten secrets, their echoes lingering long after I awoke. These moments left me with a sense of unease, as if the mansion's dark history still sought to ensnare me, even from afar. Despite the distance, Kurilla's influence refused to fade, leaving me to wonder if its grip would ever truly loosen. Sometimes, I would feel the warmth of my sister's spirit envelop me, like a gentle embrace on a cold night. She visited me not as a ghostly apparition but as a comforting presence in my dreams, always guiding me with soft words and tender warnings. "Be strong," she would whisper, her voice carrying the strength of a bond that even death could not sever. "But beware. The blind woman is not finished. She searches for you, Sarah. She will always search." These words, spoken with love yet tinged with foreboding, brought me both solace and unease. They reminded me that, while I had physically left Kurilla behind, its haunting legacy had not fully released its grip on me. Her warnings lingered in my mind, a quiet yet persistent reminder that my journey with Corilla's shadows was far from over, but that I was not alone in facing them. Still, I have found solace here in Tyrone. Surrounded by familiar landscapes and a sense of safety, I've started to heal. Each day, I remind myself of the lessons I learned, the courage it takes to walk away from darkness, like the day I packed my belongings and left Corilla, leaving behind the shadows that threatened to consume me. It is the strength found in listening to one's instincts, as I did when the blind woman's warnings and my own unease told me the mansion held dangers I could not endure. And it is the power of embracing the light, even when shadows linger, a daily reminder as I rebuild my life in Tyrone, choosing hope and love over fear and regret. These lessons have shaped me, guiding me toward a future no longer bound by the past. Corilla's secrets may follow me, but they will not define me. Instead, I choose to redefine my life by embracing the peace and love that now surround me. Each day, I focus on building a future where I am no longer bound by fear but guided by hope. My story will not be one of shadows, but of resilience and light. So, that is my story, a journey through loss, fear, and ultimately self-discovery. It is a tale of resilience, of learning to trust one's instincts even in the face of the unknown, and of finding the courage to walk away from the shadows that threaten to consume us. Through these trials, I came to understand that true strength lies in knowing when to let go and embracing the light, even when it feels out of reach. Thank you for listening. I hope my story has not only entertained you but also served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a path forward if we dare to seek it.